welcome everybody who's present and those of you who are attending online. Tonight is the 5th class, which means we have only 2 classes left in this series after tonight, and boy, has time flown by. And tonight's class is on the aspects and how we look at aspects and Astrodynes. What will be unique to tonight's class as compared to the classes prior to this and to next week's class is that in tonight's class, we're only looking at one chart. Try and develop some skill in interpreting with aspects and seeing how aspects affect character and personality, how they add energy to the chart, and how the most powerful aspects, how the most powerful aspects in a chart truly stand out in the personality and in the character of the individual. So, let us start by asking the question, what are aspects? And what aspects are the geometric angles which the planetary energies form with one another as they radiate their energies towards Earth. I'm using this old chart, celestial chart, which has the Earth in the center and the zodiac in a band around the outside. You have the positions of the different planets and the sun and moon here in relationship to the Earth. So they have specific energies or vibrations that move towards Earth, and they impinge upon one another in these different patterns. Zane says, these astral whirls are not produced by the meeting of the rays of the planets from all angles. They are formed only when the planetary rays meet at definite angles. They are which have been learned through observation. When the angle at which the astral vibrations from 2 planets meet is such as to form a definite condition comparable to a whirlwind, or to a river, a rapids in a river, or to the undertow on an ocean beach, this angle is called an aspect. So, I like to describe them as being swirls or vortices in astral substance. And what these vortices do is they stimulate us into thinking and feeling in certain ways. So here are some images of vortices. These don't necessarily match up with planetary angles, but they give you a visual image of movement, energy movement. So each aspect is moving in a different fashion, or with a different color, or a different vibration. All right. Zane goes on to say, in all, then, there are 10 aspects, or definite angles, at which planetary rays meet to exert a definite influence. The disturbance in the astral streams, when they meet from certain angles, is, like a cyclone, very violent and destructive. When they meet from other angles, the result is the formation of energies that tend to bind together and build up the astral organisms that they contact. These energies are such that they may be constructively utilized by the astral forms receiving them. But other energies, formed by astral currents meeting at other angles, exhibit an explosive tendency when contacting astral forms. So, what we've been learning over the last few weeks, even without yet studying aspects, is the fact that aspects add energy to any chart. Energy equates to power. Aspects contribute conditioning energy, and those conditions are the conditions of either harmony or discord or neutral energy, which is just power. This is an image of the different angles that we measure from the conjunction, planets in 0 degrees, 1 sign apart, 1.5 signs apart, 2 signs apart, 3 signs apart, 4 signs apart, 4.5 signs apart, 5 signs apart, 6 signs apart, or 180 degrees. Again, 5 signs apart. We're seeing repeats of these other aspects mirrored on this side of the chart. So, we're going to talk about them. These are the symbols which describe the type of vortice that is being created. The type of vortex that each one of these creates is dependent on the geometric angle at which they meet. So, when I look at a chart, we've already talked about the fact that the planets are tones. The signs are sounding boards. The houses are the auditorium that we're sitting inside of while the music's playing outside. What the aspects do is they determine the composition of the chart. And as we know from listening to different types of music, that there is some tones that are mellifluous and melodic and harmonious to our ear. There is other music that is disturbing or dissonant to our ears. And thus it is the same with charts. Depending on the combination of aspects in a chart, individuals can come across as being pleasant to be around. Have you ever met people like that? Yeah. And have you ever met people that are jarring to be around? It all depends on the composition. That's what it's about. So, language. Some of the terms that we will use when we're talking about planets and when we're talking about aspects is we will describe a chart as being built of thought cells. This is something we discussed in our very first class on Astrodynes on the planets, that each of these planets has a thought cell associated with it, whether it's a power thought cell, whether it's a domestic thought cell, whether these are intellectual, social, aggressive, religious, safety, individualistic, utopian, or universal welfare. Operating alone, a planet in a sign and a planet in a house functions as a cell. Much like within your body, you have very specific organs that have specific functions. Your heart performs one function, your stomach another, your spleen a specific function, your liver has a specific function, the brain and the central nervous system perform specific functions. Thus it is with the planets in the chart of any individual. These are thought cells. Now, when they combine, they form what are called thought cell compounds. What does the word compound bring to mind? Chemistry. Say that again, Eric? Two things. Things are coming together. Things are compounded. They are made more complex. One thing is building upon another. So what happens when planets come together in aspects? We're delineating them in the following fashion. We look at the innate nature of the planetary energy. That's the thought cell itself. We're looking to see, what color is this? Is this domestic? Is it social? Is it power? Is it aggressive? And then, once we've identified what the elements are, what the tone is, we then look to see, is that combination conditioned? How does the power of an aspect add to this compound? And how does the conditioning nature, the harmony or discord of an aspect, add to the way in which these planets express when they are brought into combination with one another? And then we look to how those energies express through this compound or through this combination, through the regions or through the zones which are described by the houses in a chart. So those are the details that we go to when we're trying to define an aspect in a chart. Is everyone on the same page with me?
Yeah, although that's not on the page, right?
No? Okay. I made some of this stuff up today. So, yeah. But I was ad-libbing a couple of hours before class came up and putting it into my PowerPoint. So, okay. So if you feel like writing it down, if it's that helpful, I'll let you quickly do shorthand. If not, I'll try and remember to repeat this throughout the evening. But basically, innate nature of the planetary energy, conditioning determined by power and harmony of the aspect, and zones dependent on the houses through which the planets express. See, it's so simple you don't even need to take notes. I may have included it somewhere else in your notes, just not necessarily in the order in which you have them. Okay. Now, we want to think about aspects from the perspective of power and conditioning. And I realize what I'm doing right now, some of you are old pros, others of you are beginning students. And right now I'm going to throw all of the aspects at you. But we're going to take the rest of the evening to discuss them. So if you don't grasp them immediately, it's okay. The potency of the 10 aspects expresses from mild to extremely powerful. So this is determining the volume of energy that any aspect carries. They have conditioning energy, which can either be harmonious, discordant, or neutral. Basically, harmony means adds pleasure. Discord means adds pain. Neutral is none of the above. So, we're measuring in two ways. Horizontally, from harmony, neutral through discordant. And we're measuring from aspects that are weak or mild in their expression on up to aspects that are powerful. If we look at this chart, just in terms of power, there's a very good chance that the most powerful aspects in any chart that you look at might either be an opposition, a square, a conjunction, a parallel, or a trine. Because they naturally carry more weight than the semi-sextile, planets that are 1 sign apart, the inconjunct, planets that are 5 signs apart, and the sesqui square and semi-square, which are either 3.5 signs apart, 4.5 signs apart, or 1.5 signs apart. So again, these are the angles at which these vortex of energy are coming together. Are they like a cyclone? Or are they like the undertow at the beach? Or are they just like the confluence where 2 streams meet one another? Now, when we're looking at the Astrodyne report, which is what this grid is up here on the screen, the potency of the 10 aspects expresses from mild to extremely powerful, harmonious, discordant, neutral. I'm repeating myself. But then when we're reading it, this is what it looks like. The upper number represents the power of the aspect. The lower number represents the harmony or discord of the aspect. Now, harmony and discord can come in 2 different ways. When we studied the planets, if you remember, we determined that Saturn adds 1/2 discord to every aspect. Mars, 1/4. Jupiter adds 1/2 harmony to any aspect. 1/4. So that's one way. If you have a neutral aspect, then planetary energies can condition. But in this case, the opposition, which is shown here, is a purely discordant aspect. And when it's between things that are neutral, such as the moon and the midheaven, which carry no conditioning energy of their own, the aspect expresses completely discordantly. All right. Now you know if your notes are screwed up, so are mine. Because I take them from exactly the same place. Every aspect which a planet makes contributes to its power. It is universally recognized astrological principle that some aspects give planets more power than others, and that the nearer an aspect is to being perfect, the more power is given to the planets involved in the aspect. It is also universally recognized that an aspect no longer contributes to the power of the planets involved when it has reached a certain number of degrees from perfect. What we call that window of opportunity is the orb of aspect. Each aspect has a different orb, and it's going to be on the very last page of the screen. But I think I've given you aspect tables at some other point. This comes out of the Astrodyne manual. Now, aspects that are applying to be perfect are considered to be more powerful. So that is also in the mathematical formula that's used in determining Astrodynes. That is one of the items that is factored in. let me show you an applying aspect. Even though I've not taught the aspects to you tonight, other than a cursory glance, when any two planets are 6 signs apart, they're in opposition to one another. And it looks like, in a chart, like this. What planet moves faster, Venus or Pluto? So, Venus here is at 16 Scorpio 26. Pluto's retrograde at 17 Taurus 53. How much difference is there between 16 and 17?
1 degree.
Yes. And in this case, from 1626 to 53, that's what, 28 minutes? So they're 1 degree and 28 minutes apart. Because Venus is moving faster, this aspect is applying. And that means that this is more powerful than were the aspects separating.
And also, Pluto is retrograde, so it's also
Moving toward Venus.
moving toward Venus.
Yeah.
Ever
Retrograde moves
so slowly.
Yeah.
Okay.
But actually, that isn't 1.5 degrees. It's just a half a degree, isn't it?
1626 to 1726 would be 1 degree.
I see.
And then we have from 26 to 53
Right.
is about another 27 minutes.
Yeah.
So we're doing sexagesimal mathematics here when we're doing geometry. We are working in functions of 60, which is very frustrating to those of us that are accustomed to a decimal system. But once you've done astrology long enough, it becomes second nature to you. Yes?
This slide or the slide before it, is that in the notes somebody's asking? We couldn't find it.
I have no idea what's in the notes. It's potluck tonight, so or it's grab bag notes. So
It's ad-libbing.
yeah,
Is this the same chart we're going to be looking at all night long?
that part does remain constant, and this chart, the one chart we'll be looking at all night long. You will get so familiar with this. That's my goal. And you will find this chart in your pamphlet. Those of you who have checked in online, part of the grab bag of all of this is I failed to include the chart in the notes that I sent out last week to be uploaded. So today the chart was uploaded. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there are 2 things to download, tonight's notes and the chart that goes with tonight.
So the Astrodynes would include that Venus is in its fall in Scorpio,
Yes.
and then opposite Pluto, that'd be pretty discordant.
And I'll bet when we get to that aspect later, we'll discover that to be true, since we will look at each and every one of these tonight.
Gee, Venus conjunct Mars.
Because Venus could she also,
Sexy.
But couldn't they also be in mutual reception? Being Venus is at
They're in what would be called mutual discordant reception.
yeah, but they are.
Yep, because Pluto is in the sign ruled by Venus.
That's right. And
So-
Venus is.
And there is a specific numeric quotient that goes with each of these factors that the Astrodynes adds up. Since it's been about 30 years since I've done it by hand, I can't give you what those numbers are. But if it really interests you, there is a book called the Astrodyne Manual, and I'd encourage you to read that. If you want the specifics, go there. I'm just going to teach you tonight not how to calculate Astrodynes, but how to read the report.
Not only is Pluto in the sign that Venus rules Taurus and Libra, right? So.
I'm going to say,
So
let's,
it's expressing in that house of Libra, even though it's in Scorpio.
Right.
So
close to the end of the class, we'll actually look at all the oppositions, so we can do this in detail at that time. I will give you the opportunity.
interesting chart already.
But the concept I wanted to share was now looking at a separating aspect. We have here Neptune at 18 Aries, 25 retrograde, and we have the moon at 19 Leo, 57. What moves faster, the moon or Neptune? Yes, the moon makes a complete cycle of the zodiac in about every 28, 29 days. How long does it take Neptune?
80-some years.
210 years, I think.
Oh,
Yeah, 84 years for Uranus, yeah. Pluto and Neptune move really slowly. They're the tortoises of the planet. And the moon is the hare, just, the rabbit in the moon, zipping around, changing every night. It's a different size and shape. So, this is a separating aspect. We can see that from 1825 to 1957, there is 1 degree and 32 minutes difference separating. So even though that's still a very close aspect, it will be less powerful than if it was an applying aspect. So these are some of the details that hold fascination for some and cause others to yawn. This is what an aspect table looks like. And I probably failed to include this in the packet, but it's really good to have.
it's in book 8.
Thank you, yes. Horary Astrology, Book 8 is where this can be found. It's formatted slightly different in that book, but nevertheless, you have the symbol for the aspect, the description of the aspect, the number of degrees that the planets are apart from one another, and then in Hermetic astrology, which is different than some other forms of astrology, we have a different orb of aspect depending on whether it is a planet or a luminary. A luminary is the sun or moon, the two bright lights in the heavens, the orb of day and the orb of night. So the width of the orb that we allow varies depending on whether it's a planet or a luminary, whether it falls in succedent, angular, or cadent houses. I'm not going to go through this now. We don't have time. But do get an aspect table and study it, because it'll make you a smarter astrologer. All right. What else does it say? The other three aspects recognized when two planets are in the same degree of the zodiac, when two planets are in the same degree of declination, and when two planets are 150 degrees apart, do not seem integrative or disintegrative in themselves, but depend for their constructive or destructive attributes upon the tone and quality of the planetary streams they combine. Don't think anyone could say that better. Now, is that one sentence? Or? Yeah, amazing. One paragraph, one sentence. And so, I want to start tonight talking about neutral aspects. The generally most powerful of the neutral aspects, which is calculated by zodiacal longitude. And remember, zodiacal longitude, let me backtrack all the way to the very beginning. And I'll only do this once. There's an image in here I want that's way back at the start. There. Zodiacal longitude is, see this band? This is the zodiac. From, unfortunately I cannot see what is what here, but I'm assuming this is Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo. So from this point here, 0 degrees of Aries is where we start zodiacal longitude. And from 0 Aries all the way around to the end of Pisces is 360 degrees. The aspects that I have shown you, with the exception of one, the parallel, is measured where they fall along this band. Think of it as having 360 little gradient marks on it. There is one aspect which we will talk about shortly called the parallel, and that is measured differently. It is measured by what is called declination. How far north or how far south of the Earth's equator a planet falls. So we have two types of measurement. Of the 10 aspects we use, 9 of them are measured in zodiacal longitude, going around the wheel in a circle. One of them is measured according to whether the planets are in the same degree north or south of the equator. See, you're getting the class a second time.
So you're not considering the contraparallel, just the parallel?
There, we consider the parallel, whether it's contraparallel or whether it's north-north, south-south, or north-south. We don't consider it a separate aspect. It doesn't add anything different to the chart. But we'll talk about that later, too. So, the conjunction is a prominence compound. What does the word prominent bring to mind?
Something that stands out.
Yes. I have a prominent nose. It stands out. A promontory is a peak on the horizon that we can all see. So, in a chart, a prominence compound, these are going to be the things in the chart that really stand out. These are remarkable qualities or characteristics about a person. The conjunction, one of the most powerful aspects of astrology, is formed when two planets are in the same degree of the zodiac. The energies radiated by planets in conjunction move along the same path, thus reinforcing one another's character. Think of it much like a couple that's walking down the sidewalk with their arms intertwined with one another. They're moving together down the same path. So their energies are united, and it is hard to separate the expression of one from the expression of the other. Now, some of the things you need to know about this is that the conjunction is a neutral aspect. That means that it doesn't carry any innate conditioning. So if Jupiter and Venus are involved, we have harmony. And if Saturn and Mars are involved, it adds discord. It will be prominently harmonious or prominently discordant. But conjunctions stand out. And they tend to represent, when we're looking at a chart, the most significant areas of activity. So, let us look for conjunctions in a chart. What that is going to look like physically, here we have a conjunction of Mercury to the ascendant. This is the ascendant. Here we have Mercury. What it looks like physically in a chart is having two things together. Now we can see this isn't a, remember the upper line is the power and the bottom line is the harmony. Well, the ascendant is neutral and Mercury is neutral. So there's no, and the conjunction is neutral. So this is a completely neutral aspect, but it's going to be something that stands out. We can see it's not that powerful. And why? 8 degrees apart, just under 8 degrees apart.
Venus and Mars.
7 degrees and 12 minutes apart. So, let's delineate this. Can anyone throw out some keywords? When we're discussing aspects, what we're doing is we're combining the keywords that we know. The ascendant, personality, self-expression. Mercury being one's intellect or communication. Then the aspect itself, prominence. So what would we know about this chart?
This person needs to express on a relationship basis to other people his or her knowledge. It's a Venus or Libra is a relative sign, and Mercury is a communicative sign.
Or planet.
Or planet, yeah. So that's how I see it.
That was a good delineation. Here we see somebody who has a great need for self-expression.
Right.
And other way too, the affability of Libra and the communication with Mercury, this person has a very kind way of communicating.
I think you're correct. Except when he doesn't. Why? Because Mercury's in what sign?
Scorpio.
How does Scorpio communicate?
Very determinative person also.
It's got a stinger. It's intense. But another way to look at this is, let's talk about Mercury as being one's intellect. Here, the intellect of this man is very close to his personality or self-expression. So we might also say from this chart, judging this, one of the ways in which this man may stand out is both his ability to communicate, but his ability to communicate intelligently and penetratingly. All right. That's what a conjunction looks like. Two forces moving down the same line.
Venus and Mars are in conjunction.
Well, let's look at that. Venus, conjunct Mars, and that's looking fairly powerful. 10.03. Venus is 1626. Mars is 18 Scorpio 24. We can see that this is 1 degree and 58 minutes apart, less than 2 degrees. So that is a powerful conjunction.
Venus is flying, yeah.
They're in an angular house.
There you have it. You're adding all the factors in that count in terms of making something that stands out. So, speak to me of Venus and Mars.
Well, Venus is the planet that rules beauty, and Venus is the ruler of Libra. And so it's social, artistic, affectionate, relative.
Intense, it's Scorpio.
Yeah, and it's
Now, is
intense.
Mars affectionate?
No, well,
It can be passionate.
but
Passionate.
It can be horny.
but it's softened by the conjunction to Venus. So
Or is Venus made more
aggressive.
lewd and aggressive from the conjunction to Mars?
Could be.
Socially aggressive.
Yes,
And,
you got it.
And also the keywords gratuities, and strife. So strife with gratuities.
Very good at it.
Or you could say gratuities and lust. It could be gratuitous sex.
Well, he could be a sex teacher.
Or one of the things you will find is any charts where you have a Venus-Mars conjunction, you have someone with charisma.
Right.
They have, and if it's in the first house or the seventh house, it really stands out. Because the first house is both their appearance and personality. The seventh house is their interaction with the public, which can be very compelling. So now this doesn't necessarily mean somebody's beautiful, because we've all met people that are non-beautiful, but maybe very sexy in some way. They have compelling desire energy about them. And it could be expressed either along the lines of passion, or it can be expressed in other ways, along the lines of creativity, or as being an active social force.
But I think he's very attractive on more than just one level. You know, his personality. You know, you don't have to always be attractive as on the outside, but you can express the inner beauty, and it would make a person very attractive.
And the Scorpio adds to that magnetism. Because remember, Scorpio, as we discussed it 2 weeks ago, is a healing sign, because it's dealing with that vital energy of life.
Right.
So there's another conjunction.
Jupiter.
Pluto makes it even more compelling.
Yeah.
So there's the second conjunction. Here's one that's almost as powerful, which is the conjunction of Jupiter to Pluto. Oops. All right. Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, 1753 to 2010.
So it's 2 degrees.
And 17 minutes apart. That's really close. It's also in an angular house. This is a very different combination, because if you remember in the first class, Pluto is the universal welfare urges, and Jupiter is the religious urges. When they are in a prominence compound, how do they want to express?
Compassionate, humanitarian.
They want benevolence for the masses.
Right.
They want to do something on a public scale, which involves bringing about cooperation for the greater good of all.
Religion.
This could be done through religion, through social programs, through other such means. Now, this is in the sign of Taurus, a fixed sign. So how would this person set about their religious reform or their social reform?
He turned the fifth way.
Yes, one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. He keeps plodding along till he gets his.
Accomplishes the goal.
But the stability,
Yes, this would be somebody that might not waver in their beliefs or their thoughts or their convictions. So they would be stubborn and stable, though. You would say this is somebody who is stubbornly consistent in what they are about. So there's one other, and that's going to be something about this person that stands out. His interactions with the public. Remember the house. The seventh house is marriage and partnerships, or the public, or open enemies.
So it could be someone that brings new ideas, you know, as far as religion, or for the good of humanity on a world level. So,
All right, the last conjunction in all of this. Not as strong, but significant. 7.59 is the power. We can see it's neutral. And going back to the conjunction of Venus and Mars, it's neutral. Why is it? Venus is 1/4 harmony.
yeah, but cancel each
Mars is 1/4 discord. It's like vinegar and baking soda. They do cancel each other out. Acid and alkaline. And here, we've got Uranus, which is neutral, to the midheaven, which is neutral. But here we have 4.85 harmony. Why?
because it's the highest elevated planet.
Because Jupiter's engaged, which brings 1/2 harmony to the aspect. So, Uranus, the individualistic urges are in a prominence compound with the midheaven, which is one's reputation.
Right.
What would this man have a reputation for?
A nurturer.
Being idiosyncratic.
Let's focus on the aspects, which is for being idiosyncratic, for being wacky, for being rebellious, for being authority oppositional, for trying to change the established way of doing things. So that is something about this man that's going to stand out.
Yeah, because it also aspects the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So,
Let's just focus on the one aspect,
okay.
because there's going to be plenty to talk about tonight. Part of doing astrology well is staying focused. Otherwise, we want to look at everything in the kitchen sink. Okay. Yes, this is the chart of Gandhi. And we've already talked about these aspects, so we'll move on. Let's talk about the parallel aspect. Intensity. What's intensity?
Really focused on something, on an idea.
It's focused. It's a heightened level of energy. I like to describe the intensity aspect as something that is amplified, something that is made greater or made louder. So the parallel aspect, we've already talked about this. It's formed when two planets occupy the same degree of declination, either both north, both south, or north to south, which is called by some the contraparallel. This is the only aspect considered in the Hermetic system which is not calculated by zodiacal longitude. Now, here's the rub when it comes to interpreting parallels. They're somewhat ambiguous. I find them to be the hardest aspect to give a description to, because it is not prominent as is the conjunction. With the conjunction, you have those lines of force generally expressing within the same house, unless both planets are straddling a house cusp. So you have this laser beam focus. What the parallel does is it just starts to, it's like turning up the volume on your radio. It starts to make the experience louder somehow. And this is especially so when the same planets are involved in a, what I call a hard aspect, or a longitudinal aspect. When they're engaged in a semi-square, a semi-sextile, a conjunction, an opposition, and a parallel, what happens is the aspect gets more definition. And the longitudinal aspect that the planets are engaged in expresses itself more loudly because of the parallel. It's as though the amplifier has been turned up. So, the way one discovers parallels, when you're looking at a chart and the declinations are written down, you can easily go and see, are they both in 15 degrees? Are they both in 14 degrees? Is it 14 degrees, 38 minutes to 15 degrees, 26 minutes? But the other way to look at it is when you have an aspect graph, see these lines here? This separates the aspects that are hard aspects from the aspects determined by declination, the parallel. So, there you have it. Those are all the parallels. We can see Mercury forms a parallel to the Moon. We would then say that there is an intensity compound between this man's intellect and his nurturing or domesticity. Think of Mercury as being the cerebral instincts and the moon being the subliminal. We have minds that work in two different ways. We have rational, conscious, calculating, perceptive minds, and we have this other mind which is instinctual. That comes from our experience as an animal, where we have to be constantly alert to the environment around us and those things that may be dangerous to us.
But if Mercury's intellect, and then the moon, domestic, how would you say that? Domestically intellect or intellectually domestic?
I guess either way, depending on
It
which
doesn't
one
really
is
matter?
stronger. No. Or we might say that this is somebody who has a heightened awareness of being able to combine both cerebral thinking and subliminal thinking. And it would affect both personality and career. Well, that's a somewhat ambiguous description, but that's the nature of the parallel. We have a parallel aspect of Mars, the aggressive urges. Wow, that's powerful, but not as powerful as that. 1309, that looks like the strongest aspect in the chart. So this would give somebody even an intellectual awareness of what the masses are thinking. That's very important in inspirational speaking, where you are able to dial your consciousness into the group of people that you're interacting with and to come up with the information that they need.
So what you're looking at more is the house, the power in the house. You're looking at the Mercury towards the house rather than more of the urge.
No, in this delineation, I wasn't including the house as much as the power. The power being the greatest. And,
Okay.
and again, part of this class is about using Astrodynes to determine what's really strong in a chart. Because what's really strong in the chart may be the most outstanding quality of that individual. And I think we've touched upon it here, which would be his ability to read the needs of the masses. Think of the moon as also representing the common people. So, we've got aggressive urges intensified with the social urges. Well, here, because we have the advantage of seeing them also in a conjunction, this is, mojo love force expressing in the chart. Conjunct and parallel, Venus and Mars. Expressing through the first house of physicality and the physical body in the I desire sign of Scorpio. This is a man of intense passions. What happens to people that have poor impulse control? They end up in prison. You end up in prison, in jail, in juvenile detention center, chained up in somebody's basement or who knows, but it happens. And so that with something like this, a person has to gain a degree of control over their life because they're being driven by their desires or by their passions. And we have Jupiter parallel the moon. So here we would have the religious urges in an intensity compound with the domestic urges. That might express Jupiter in the 7th house. This could be devotion to a spouse or partner. Tied in with the moon, which has to do with domesticity or creating a home. Well, the thing is, Gandhi's home was an ashram, which means that Gandhi's wife had a family that was not just their immediate family. It was the entire community. So the Jupiter brought expansiveness to the home. Not only do you have, the wife and daughters living there, but you end up having everyone else that enters into the community. there's another parallel here between Jupiter and Mercury, which would combine the intellectual urges of Mercury with the religious urges of Jupiter. So this is somebody who would try to make decisions based on a sense of ethics or wanting to always reach for the higher thought. And then, I skipped the last one, which is also very powerful. The midheaven parallel, Saturn parallel the midheaven. So that is the safety urges in an intensity compound with one's reputation.
Which he totally threw in the wind.
Right, but in some ways, he was actually very conservative.
Right.
I mean, he followed very traditional religion. When asked by other people, what religion should I follow, he'd say, well, what religion were you born into? Follow that one.
Yeah.
The inconjunct. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there are certain aspects which, although it's good to learn to interpret them, they don't carry much energy, and the inconjunct is one of those. It's a weak aspect, and it is neutral, which means it doesn't carry any energy with it in terms of conditioning. Venus and Jupiter at harmony, Saturn and Mars at discord, but basically it's neutral like the conjunction and the parallel. It's more like the parallel in that it's really hard to define. Its strength is very weak, like the semi-sextile. What happens is when there's an inconjunct in a chart, these are two planets 5 signs apart. There are temporary periods in one's life where those matters come together and then they pull apart and separate. So we call it an expansion compound. But the nature of the inconjunct is it brings these events to pass that can be very hard to capitalize on because quite often the moment is fleeting. So, does he have any? Well, here's an inconjunct between Venus and Neptune. That means they are 5 signs apart. 16 Scorpio, 16 Sag, 16 Capricorn, 16 Aquarius, 16 Pisces, 18 Aries. 5 signs 2 degrees apart. So, social urges in an expansion compound with the utopian urges. How would that work? If we look at house position, social urges, first house, we've already determined, Mr. Charisma. Neptune is a utopian type of workplace. And one of the things he did that was really quite remarkable, in the effort to gain Indian independence from Britain, he brought up the utopian ideal of cottage industry. What happened at that time in India is India was being used to grow the commodity cotton, which was then sent to Manchester in England to be woven in the mills there. And then that fabric was sent back to India to be sold, to be made into garments. He decided that, again, these were concepts of economic boycott. And one of the ways to cripple British economy was to tell people to spin their own damn yarn. And that, of course, you're not going to get the fine textured muslins and cottons that you'd find on machined looming. But there was a period of time where many Indians were doing homespun, cottage industry, in this utopian ideal that they could succeed with independence. So there they are, 5 signs apart. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another inconjunct from Mars to Neptune.
Well, it took aggressive energy to bring this home cottaging into reality.
Yeah, to bring idealistic programs to the masses, it takes a lot of personal energy. And what did he have to do? He had to do it himself. You have to set the personal example if you're going to get others to follow you. All right, let's talk about harmonious aspects. Saint says, when planetary rays meet at an angle of 120 degrees, the aspect is called a trine. And experience shows that when planetary rays converge at a trine, 1/2 a trine, or 1/4 a trine, each aspect having an influence peculiar to itself, the influence is distinctly integrative and constructive. So, a trine looks like this, like a triangle. In astrology, we call this the luck compound because it is powerful and it is harmonious. This means that any two planets are 120 degrees apart. This measures into 4 signs of zodiacal longitude. More often than not, they are going to be in the same element. This means planets in Aries trines planets in Leo and Sagittarius. Planets in Taurus trines planets in Virgo and Capricorn. Planets in Gemini could trine planets in Libra and Aquarius. Planets in Cancer can form trines to planets in Scorpio and in Pisces. So they're in the same element. There's something very familiar and complementary and easy going on there. So it's the most favorable aspect. It shows ability, favors, opportunities, things that come easily and spontaneously. These are the lucky breaks in life. Now, to take advantage of any aspect in your chart, I will guarantee you, you will feel your discordant aspects. There is a good chance you may not feel your harmonious ones, because generally we don't recognize things that don't hurt. So, under trine aspects, you have to figure out how to work them, how to take advantage of them, because the more concerted effort that you put into your trines, the more likely you are to gain some advantage from this. There is another aspect which is called a grand trine. Now this is not a separate aspect, but what it is when you have 3 planets that are evenly distributed throughout the chart, 120 degrees or 4 signs apart. And what they are doing is they are each making trine aspects to one another. And this is considered to be enormously fortuitous. Generally, they are in the same element. What I described earlier, the fire, earth, air, water. So, the houses where these planets fall are brought together in a very beneficial interaction with one another. Let's look for trines. This man actually has quite a few, and we unfortunately don't have enough time to talk about all of them and still get to the end of the class having covered every aspect. So, one of the trines in his chart is the moon forms a trine to Saturn, 19 Leo to 12 Sagittarius. It's not very powerful. We see it's 4.42, and the harmony involved is only 2.21. Why is that if the trine is so harmonious? Saturn's involved. 1/2 discord. Nevertheless, it is still a harmonious aspect. So the domestic urges and the safety urges are combined here. This might allow someone to live very frugally, Saturn in the second house, and might develop a public reputation for that. One of the things that Gandhi did while living in South Africa and fighting for human rights there is when the townspeople wanted to give his family rewards for his efforts, he turned them down, which was very upsetting to his wife, who wanted to live a little more comfortably than they were living. But he knew that if he was going to live a public life, he would also have to live a life of simplicity, so that there could be no opportunity for graft or corruption or payoffs or anything of that nature. That he could not, his integrity could not be called into question. So that's a Moon-Saturn trine. Now, we also have the Moon trine Neptune, which is over here, 19 Leo to 18 Aries. If you look at the power, that is a strong aspect. Because even though the Moon is separating, it's still very close by degree.
Isn't that
So-
grand trine?
It is. We're going to get to that, though.
Sorry.
So the Moon, the domestic urges, and the utopian urges are united in a luck compound. This is somebody who could naturally use intuition and or inspiration in order to impact the masses. And we have Venus trine Uranus, first house to ninth house. Again, this could add to this person's charisma and their ability to speak towards change, Uranus. We have a trine between Venus and the midheaven because Uranus and the midheaven are so close by. So, even his enemies would have to like this man because there would be qualities about him that were really quite friendly or affable. He would have to meet his enemies with love. And one of the things he taught was nonviolence, ahimsa, which meant that if you were struck, you could not strike back. And it actually, in the newsreels of the time, made the British out to look like very brutal people. Because here they were beating up on, nonviolent protesters. Here we have Mars forming a trine to Uranus because they're conjunct. And you've got the aggressive urges and the individualistic urges in a trine. Is this man a rabble-rouser or what? But a lovable rabble-rouser. And we have Mars forming a trine to the midheaven, just like Venus. We have a lot of trines here. And then to answer, your question, Johanna, there is a grand trine because Saturn also forms a trine to Neptune. 12 degrees to 18 means it's 6 degrees apart. This is a wide trine. We can see it's very weak. But nevertheless, it is a grand trine in the chart, combining the house of money with the house of work, with the house of career. We don't know that this man made a lot of money from what he did. Saturn's in the second house. But he was able to bring in enough money to accomplish his objectives and to be able to also maintain his idealism. That's the trine. Now, half a trine is a sextile. This means planets that are 2 signs apart, 60 degrees. What this also means is that more often than not, except when a planet's at the end of one sign and the beginning of another, they will be in complementary elements. So planets in Earth will be sextile to planets in water. Planets in fire are sextile to planets in air. And the sextile aspect is harmonious, but not as harmonious as a trine. We describe it as an opportunity compound. Well, what is an opportunity?
A chance to do better.
Uh-huh. Has anyone here ever lost an opportunity?
Yeah.
Because what happens when you don't take advantage of opportunities? Not a whole heck of a lot. So, where you have sextiles in your chart, it shows a potential waiting to be expressed, but it means that some concerted effort must be made in order to reap the benefit of this aspect. Let's look for sextiles. Well, Sun, sextile Saturn. 8 degrees Libra to 12 degrees Sagittarius. Do you see the complementary signs? Air and fire. It's a wide sextile, so it's not that powerful. It's a luminary in a cadent house. So it's 4 degrees apart. Let's put our keywords together. The power urges and the safety urges combined.
He uses his safety measures to obtain what he wants to accomplish.
And somewhat
Just in
tongue-in-cheek,
a cautious way.
when you're in jail, you don't spend a lot of money.
That's right.
He was imprisoned a lot.
Right.
But it was probably very safe there.
No, maybe not quite a bit.
Yeah, I don't
He
know.
survived
It's been about 40 years since I read his autobiography, a book called My Experiments with Truth. And I think because of this personal charisma, people were just really drawn to him and very respectful of him. So, yes, Barb.
Joya says that in his biography it was said it took a lot of gold to keep Gandhi poor. And it also, she said, women threw their gold jewelry to him in expressions of adoration.
And in India, gold jewelry is your wealth. I mean, India, I think, owns more gold than anywhere else because it is portable wealth. That is used for dowries. It is how, women and families express their wealth. All right, there's a sextile from the moon to the ascendant. Here we have the domestic urges and the personality in this opportunity compound. Well, basically one might say that this is somebody who could express himself well and have a personality that, even though he was Oxford educated, where he still could appeal to the public. And I don't know if it was Oxford. It may have been Cambridge that he attended. Again, it's a long time since I've read his bio. But that's the aspect. 2 signs apart. Again, we have fire to air. What else do we have? A sextile between Jupiter, the religious urges, and Uranus, the individualistic urges. So this is somebody who was developing new philosophies or new ideas and able to gain public support for his philosophies. The time was right. Has nonviolence ever been a popular philosophy? No. What happens when somebody smacks us?
Get upset.
We just want to smack them back. So he was introducing this radical idea at that time. And we also have Uranus sextile Pluto, because Jupiter and Pluto are conjunct. So the universal welfare urges and the individualistic urges are combined. This is somebody who could introduce a new philosophy, a new public expression that could inflame or infect or appeal to the masses. And we've already talked about these, so let's skip through this slide. The semi-sextile, this is half a sextile. This means any two planets that are 1 sign apart, 30 degrees in a chart. Weak, nevertheless, harmonious. And this is a mildly benefic cooperation that combines the matters represented by both planets. Because this is such a weak aspect, you really have to work it to get its benefits. What that looks like in a chart, all right, the moon, semi-sextile Uranus, 21 Cancer to 19 Leo. 21 Cancer to 21 Leo is 30 degrees or 1 sign apart. So we can see that this falls within a little more than 2 degrees of aspect. Semi-sextiles are weak. They're both neutral planets, and because the aspect is harmonious, it brings a slight amount of harmony here. The moon can be one's emotions or one's subliminal thinking, tied in with the idea-provoking originality of Uranus. This, again, is somebody that could function within the realm of inspiration or intuition and be able to take advantage of that. So, 2 planets, 1 sign apart. Look, there's another. Jupiter and Neptune. Neptune's at 18 Aries. Jupiter is at 20 Taurus. 18 Aries to 18 Taurus is 1 sign or 30 degrees apart. Here again, we can see they're separated by an orb of a little more than 2 degrees. Because Neptune is cadent, this is even weaker than the other aspect. This being formed by a luminary is stronger. These are 2 planets. So here we might use our language to say the utopian urges and the religious urges combine in a mildly favorable way, in a growth pattern, to impact one's work and one's relationships. But we know it's also going to be semi-sextile to Pluto. Neptune, semi-sextile, Pluto, since there's a conjunction here. 18 to 17, 29 degrees apart. Here we have the utopian urges and the universal welfare urges in a mild growth compound. So we can see from the nature of those aspects that this work he was doing, this idealistic work in trying to affect the masses, had ripe opportunity for growth, but did it come easily and without effort? No, he had to work it to make it happen. All right. That's it for harmonious aspects. Let's talk about the other guys. Are you all catching on through this process? This is, to me, the really interesting part of astrology, is putting this stuff together. Experience teaches that astral currents from the planets meeting at a right angle, 1/2 a right angle, 1 1/2 a right angle, and twice a right angle, each has a disintegrative or destructive influence. A right angle, of course, is 90 degrees, and the aspect formed by the planetary rays meeting at a right angle is called a square. I don't want to seem gender biased, but I'm assuming, Gerald, you might be the only one in the class that uses a square. Does anyone else here use a square? Bart does, I do, so you're not the only one.
Tool.
We're all squares.
Yeah, we're all L7s. Okay. A square is a 90-degree angle. If you do drafting, if you do carpentry, any construction, chances are you'll have had the opportunity to use one.
You do construction, Carol?
Little.
Make picture frames.
All right, we described the square as an obstacle compound. Did anyone in this room ever do track in high school or junior high or college? Okay. What usually happened after you leaped over an obstacle on the obstacle course? You either knocked it over or you sailed over it successfully and encountered the next one.
You fell flat on your face. And, oh,
Yeah.
God.
So, the square aspects in your chart are very similar to the obstacle course you may have run in track. Because these are very enduring qualities and they don't go away easily. So chances are you know the squares in your chart because they're going to be areas of your life where you have repeated issues. And the square is when two planets are 90 degrees or 3 signs apart. This means that more often than not, they are going to be in the same mode of activity, such as mutable, fixed, or movable. Mutable, fixed, or movable. Very discordant. Acute conflict and violent antagonisms that cause radical changes in your life. Sounding better by the moment. The square aspect requires determination and carefully directing the planetary energies into their most constructive avenue of expression. Do you know what that is? The hardest work you've ever done in your life. But it can be done. Squares can be turned into building blocks. Well, guess what? It may come as no surprise, but this man has more than his fair share of squares. So we're going to have to zip through some of them just to be able to end class on time. Here, domestic urges, or the moon, square the social urges, or Venus. What's that about?
That everybody appreciated what he was doing.
When I was a child, my mother, when we'd get whiny, my mother would sing a song to us, which went, "Nobody loves me, everybody hates me, going to the garden to eat worms. Big ones, small ones, itty bitty tall ones, boy, how they do squirm." Did anyone else know that song? Well, yes. All right, we have a chorus here. So that's what a moon-Venus square is like. Even if everybody loves you, which is quite a chance with Venus and Mars conjunct in Scorpio in the first house, you still may not recognize it, or it might not seem like enough to you. So there's a type of neediness that comes with that aspect. And we might say that for this person, think of this, first house, personal love is not enough. I need the public love of the masses. Oh, there's another square from the moon to Mars. Why? Venus and Mars are conjunct. So, here we have the aggressive urges and the domestic urges in an obstacle compound. Guess what? Gandhi had a temper. The architect of nonviolence was not originally a nonviolent man. This is somebody who had to train himself and control his impulses and his emotions that were in this obstacle compound, seeing injustice or unfairness and wanting to react to it. All right. Well, there's more fun because the moon also squares Jupiter. The religious urges and the domestic urges are in a conflict.
Well, his relationship with his wife or those within his immediate family probably didn't always appreciate having to share him with so many other people.
Also, India has a very highly stratified society, which is known as a caste system. Depending on which caste you are born into, you are subject to performing certain functions throughout life. Much similar to the way in which race dominated this country for years. The same there. And so there are certain people called untouchables or pariah. And they have jobs like collecting dead animals, tanning leather, which people of higher caste would never think of touching, a dead animal or tanning leather or cleaning out privies. But when he lived in an egalitarian community and brought his wife into that, she was also expected to clean out the privy. And somebody of a high-born caste would have found that so incredibly offensive. Please make me do anything but this. Beat me, but don't make me perform this task. And here's another one, square to Pluto. Now, didn't we determine? No, we haven't determined, but there is an aspect here called a T-square. We have 4 planets opposing one another, and they form squares to a third planet. So, this is a highly disruptive compound. We're not going to go into all the details, but the intellectual urges are forming a square to the midheaven. This man was so smart, he could get himself in trouble with his authority figures or his superiors. Look, Uranus forms a square to Neptune in this chart. 18 Aries, movable sign, to 821 Cancer, movable sign. Here we have planets in a fixed sign squaring planets in a fixed sign. So you can see how the squares function. Uranus square Pluto oftentimes represents periods in society where there are huge social upheavals taking place. Just like now, just like the present. Here we have Uranus square the ascendant, 21 Cancer to 25 Libra. The individualistic urges are in a conflict with the personality. What is the personality like with Libra rising? Charming, fair, kind, affable. Whoever uses those words to describe a radical. It means that there is something incongruous going on here. I think we have a couple more squares. Yes. Neptune square. The midheaven. The utopian urges are in an obstacle compound with one's reputation. And the midheaven squares the ascendant, which is not uncommon in charts. because they form a right angle to one another. So if you're born anywhere near the equator, in the tropical latitudes, chances are your midheaven squares your ascendant. All right, we've talked about the square. All right, let's talk about half of a square, a semi-square, which is 45 degrees or 1 1/2 signs apart. Semi-squares and sesqui-squares are very hard to pick out visually in a chart. You really have to have an aspect finder to be able to locate them. Or have a finely developed math autism where you can just spot these things. This aspect is mildly discordant, manifest as uncertainty and vacillation. Well, that doesn't sound like a big deal. Who doesn't have uncertainty and vacillation? So what you can tell is semi-squares are not the big cataclysmic upheavals in your life. But let me tell you that worry, criticism, reoccurring abrasions can be cumulative. These little niggly problems over and over and over can really wear or grate on one's nerves. So what can you do? If you have semi-squares in your chart, you have to really train yourself to maintain a positive attitude, because it doesn't always come naturally. They make you cranky. These are the cranky aspects. So, Sun semi-square the Moon, 1.5 signs. 19 Leo to 19 Virgo would be 1 sign. Add 15. That would take us to 4 degrees of Libra. We can see that this is very mild because it's another 4 degrees off from being perfect. But nevertheless, this is somebody whose domestic expressions and his power or self-esteem have their panties in a bunch. Curiously, in this chart, the Sun is the weakest planet. It's relatively unaspected, and it's in the 12th house. So much of what we might interpret as being the ego of Gandhi is actually just this fierce public persona with the moon in Leo, more than a personal drive. He would be somebody that would definitely have to force himself out into the public to do it for the greater good. And there's a semi-square, a friction compound between the safety urges and one's health or physical body. How did that express? He was constantly removing items from his diet. What else would he do? Thank you. Thank you. Hunger strikes. He would fast for long periods of time. How good is that on your body? Well, we know from people like Gandhi and people like Cesar Chavez, it can bring you to the verge of death. So the safety urges weren't thinking clearly about personal survival or health.
Didn't he fast a lot in prison when they were imprisoning him? He bit fast and.
Yeah, hunger strikes, they're called. So only 2 semi-squares, so there's not a lot of uncertainty and vacillation in this man. Sesqui square, an agitation compound. What does your washing machine do when it's on the agitation cycle?
It's lopsided.
Ka-chunk, 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 ka-chunk.
It was in a motion, a continuous motion.
Right. It's shaking things up.
Yeah.
So whenever planets are 3.5 signs apart, this is the compound that's formed, the agitation compound. Moderately discordant, same strength as the semi-square. And if you think about the keywords, friction and agitation aren't too far from one another. These, like the semi-squares, are those little annoyances that can just, build up and get on your nerves.
Isn't it 4.5 signs apart?
Yes.
Square and a half?
Yes, you are correct. I stand corrected. 4.5 signs apart, because it is a square and a half. No,
120.
no, it's 3.5 signs. It is a square is 90. 90 plus 45 is 135. 90 is 3 signs.
It's a triangle and a half. Even though we had
30 is 4 signs. And
Okay.
15 is 4.5.
You're right. Yeah, 4.5 signs. Made an error.
Which one?
Oh, yeah. Just maybe the first one tonight.
You actually said 4.5 signs earlier this
Did I? Okay.
Yeah.
I feel relieved.
week. Yeah.
All right. This is not forceful, but it tends to. It's like shaking the table. Or if you rock back and forth in a chair, there's a difference between picking your chair up and bashing it, or leaning back in your chair repeatedly until the legs become loose and the chair collapses under you. This is like the latter. It's not this violent disruption, but it's a constant movement that goes on that tends to break things apart. All you can do with Sesqui squares is try and maintain your grace under fire. So, I think we only have one in this chart, and that is between Saturn and the midheaven. So there is a agitation compound between the safety urges and one's reputation or self-esteem. And again, we could see there is a mild conflict here between pursuing a career and making money doing it. He was one of the most powerful people in India with the least money. Usually if we think of politics, and especially looking now in an election year, who do we think of the politicians as being? Those persons who are able to amass the greatest fortunes.
In our country.
Yes. All right. Now, onto a very powerful and a very disintegrative aspect, the opposition. 180 degrees or 6 signs apart. These are very easy to pick out in a chart. Planets in Aries, opposed, planets in Libra. Planets in Taurus, opposed, planets in Scorpio. Planets in Gemini oppose planets in Sagittarius. Planets in Cancer oppose Capricorn. Planets in Leo, Aquarius, Virgo, Pisces. Or you can look at the houses. First house planets can oppose seventh house planets. Second house to eighth house. Third house to ninth house. Fourth house to 10th house. They are opposite. So, have any of you in your lives ever been in a tug of war? It's a game we used to play at camp, where you'd get two groups on either ends of a rope and start tugging. That is how the opposition operates. If you think about it, on one hand, both parties are being held together. So there's something very compelling there. But ultimately, one of them usually goes flying. I like these words, slowly and unrelentingly. That is how the oppositions work. Think of them as being both compelling and repelling. So we call it a separation compound. The matters between those planets are being pulled apart. The Sun opposes Neptune, 8 Libra to 18 Aries. Well, look how weak that is. It's 10 degrees apart. A luminary in a cadent house. So, not in any way powerful or highly discordant, a minus 1.5 discordines, but nevertheless it's going to be felt. If we think of Neptune as a planet when discordant, can amplify things or create hypersensitivity, the Sun can also represent the ego or one's self-esteem. This is somebody who might really struggle with his sense of power. Am I being spiritual if I express my power or my ego or my self-esteem? I imagine there's more separation compounds in this chart. Ah, look, Venus opposing Jupiter. So we have the social urges in opposition to the religious urges. Well, even though oppositions are discordant, that's not terribly discordant, is it? Why? Because you've got the benefics involved. Well, you know, pretty much the worst thing that Venus and Jupiter can do is to lead one another to excess. So I remember one story about Gandhi when a woman brought her son to him and, said, "Oh, Gandhiji, will you please tell my son to stop eating sugar?" He said, "Yes, please come back in 3 weeks." She came back in 3 weeks with her son, and he said to the little boy, "Stop eating sugar." And the woman said, "Why did I have to wait 3 weeks for this?" And he said, "Well, 3 weeks ago I had not stopped eating sugar." All right. Venus also opposes Pluto. Social urges and the universal welfare urges are in a separation compound to one another. How would that express? Self, first house, and others, seventh house. Yeah, through marriage or relationships. Gandhi was married at age 13. It was an arranged marriage, which is the custom in India. So this wasn't, if you think of Pluto as being coercion or force, and Venus being love, both parties were sort of forced into this as being a family arranged union. Mars opposes Pluto. Aggressive urges and the universal welfare urges. Yeah, and I would have guessed also, it's probably very hard for him to decide upon nonviolent resistance, because a Mars-Pluto opposition really,
Actually, it's
once...
Mars and Jupiter.
Oh, thank you. Let's see. Is there a Mars-Pluto opposition? No. Mars and Jupiter. So you've got the aggressive urges and the religious urges. That could actually be antagonism towards religion.
Mars and Pluto have an opposition too.
Yeah, it's opposite over.
Okay,
Yeah.
here they are.
Yeah.
Jupiter, Pluto. So there's a lot of energy in this chart. And if we look at it, we could actually discern that there is a lot of discordant energy in this chart. There is not only a T-square, but there's also a grand trine going on. So this is somebody whose life definitely had enormous struggles and conflicts, but was actually, through constantly focusing his will and refining his desire energy to do something constructive rather than destructive, made enormous changes in the world. So, T-square, two planets in opposition or 180 degrees apart, and they both form a 90 degrees or square aspect to a third planet. Difficult aspect, it brings heightened conflict and disruptions along any of the three planets in aspect. Generally speaking, the more powerful of the three planets siphons the energy. There is also an aspect called a grand square, which is not present in this chart. But this is when you have four planets which are equally distant, 3 signs apart, basically 90 degrees to one another. They form a cross. And they are each forming 90 degree or square aspects to one another, 2 oppositions and 4 squares. This is considered to be one of the most stressful aspects you can have in a chart. But I've known a few people over the years that have these that turn out to be incredibly creative individuals.
You could deal with challenges everywhere they turn.
Exactly. They can deal with challenges wherever they turn. Why? They've never had life easy. So there isn't this expectation that it should be anything other than continuing to put out effort. So this is also a table which is really good for studying aspects. The aspect, the degrees, the description, the expression, keyword, what you need to apply, and the nature of the aspect. So these are great ways to study aspects. I usually pass these out in the beginning class. And I could provide, if you don't have one, I can provide some next week if I remember.
I think there's also was an Astrodyne with
Okay. Let me just take the cord out from the back. Let's see. That'll fix this. Oh. There. Is it really hot in here?
It's
Yes,
warm.
it is.
I am just in a sauna. That's because it's in the hallway it's 78 degrees. I believe it's hotter out here under the bright lights. All right. Any questions on tonight's class? Since we've got 10 minutes, we can do a Q&A period here. If there's... Yes, Michelle.
You know, about Gandhi's son being the weakest planet. Could you say about that he was able to sacrifice his ego for his greater philosophy?
Right, and of course the ego is in the house of sacrifice, the 12th house, which has to do somewhat with martyrdom. Well, how did Gandhi die? He was assassinated in 1949, I believe.
Hidden enemies, the house of hidden enemies.
Yes. He was shot while moving through a crowd at a rally. So the sun in the 12th house can show self-sacrifice. Clearly the ego had to be sacrificed to do great work. Because, again, his sun's in Libra. And, I mean, sadly, he wasn't successful in what he hoped to do, which was to create an integrated India. Upon independence, India suffered the partition, which was between predominantly Hindu-governed India and Muslim or Islamic Pakistan. And back in my childhood, there was both an East and West Pakistan, which had difficulty governing united. It's now Pakistan and Bangladesh are the two separate countries. What is little known to most, of course, this took place 4 years after the end of World War II, with all of its loss of millions of lives. But it's believed that at least 1 million people lost their lives in the violence that accompanied the partition of India. Yes?
I don't understand how we can lose half an opposition. It seems to me that the only way to work it out is to validate both ends of the polarity and find a way for them to complement each other.
And some might say that, and some might say the way you do it is you end up making a choice. I'm going to have Italian rather than Thai food tonight because there may be a Chinese-American restaurant, but there isn't a Thai-Italian restaurant.
Yeah, but you're living with an opposition all your life.
Mm-hmm.
You can't just lose one of those polarities, can you?
No, but you make repeated choices to honor one over the other. And usually the decision is more easily accommodated. It doesn't mean that you don't have the conflict coming up repeatedly. I mean, have any of you known old people on their deathbeds that still had conflicts going on in their lives? It's known to happen that one can enter this world with stress and leave it with stress. You know, many times people leave the world fighting viciously. And so not everybody is able to master those things, so they live their entire life with the same conflict. For most people, there is an ability to come into some kind of awareness or agreement or comfort with it. Usually it is done by choosing the more powerful of the two planets in the opposition. There's always going to be one that's slightly more powerful than the other. And what that means, Laura, is that the desire energies for that expression are greater than the others. So if the planet in the 7th house is actually more powerful than the ascendant or the planet in the 1st house that it's opposing, oftentimes the person will finally surrender to the idea that, well, maybe my satisfaction doesn't come about by going through life having my needs met. Maybe my real happiness comes through doing things for other people. Or the person with the 2nd to 8th house oppositions might decide at some point that their happiness actually comes about when they don't take on indebtedness. That every time they go into the experience of indebtedness, that it creates a feeling of pain or enslavement for them. So they decide at some point that they actually don't have to have all of these things that they're unable to afford. Or it might go the other way. The person if the 8th house may be stronger or more harmonious, the individual might decide that, well, maybe I don't have to struggle all my life trying to make a living. Maybe I can actually accept the inheritance that, the trust fund that's been set aside for me that I've rebelled against because my family were weapons dealers, or whatever the conflict might be. We make choices of one over the other. And it doesn't mean that on that person's deathbed they may not be thinking, well, should I really have used that money or not? The thoughts, except for the most sainted of all of us, oftentimes those things are still in place operating, but in a less powerful dynamic. Now, what we haven't discussed was what to do about it, which I hope to do in the last class, but I might, considering the timing of the last class, just being a couple weeks before the elections, I was thinking of using that class to look at the 2 candidates and to look at their charts from Astrodyne power and try and determine which might show greater leadership. But the other thing that can be done, Laura, is sometimes in a chart you will have what is called a conciliatory factor. What does conciliatory mean?
Like something that's trying to one pole of the opposition and sextile to the other?
Exactly. This would be a planet that falls between the planets in opposition. Only it doesn't fall exactly between, because that would be a T-square, meaning even more conflict. But there are these other vortexes of energy that can combine more integratively. And so sometimes you'll have a planet that's at 120 degrees to one of the planets in the opposition and 60 degrees away from the other planet. So it's in its own accord engaged in harmonious constructive expression with both of these planets that are battling one another. And sometimes by focusing on the nature of that planet, it almost works to siphon off the disintegrative nature of the opposition, and that can be helpful.
I've learned to just say, well, to myself, let's see how this is going to work out. No, being aware of both energies, but not trying to be in control of trying to, use one over the other.
Right, and
being balanced.
What you've done there is good in that you've taken a mental attitude that removes some of the conditioning, which is, it's no longer a fight.
No.
It's an anticipation.
Right.
Let's see how this is going to work out.
Right.
And by doing that, the other thing you do, and this may be what you were getting at, Laura, is by removing the conditioning over time, it operates less as a struggle and more as a challenge or an expectation.
It's more fun that way.
So, next week is going to be a really interesting class that I've never taught. And this is going to be looking at the chart purely from groupings. Societies, trinities, elements, and qualities, and how that impacts character. How these are qualities that really stand out in a personality. So, there you have it. Thank you all for being here tonight.